The smallest decisions can change the course of an ordinary day in ways no one could ever predict. The quiet stretch of highway outside the city carried only a handful of vehicles beneath the warm afternoon sun as a silver sedan traveled steadily toward the federal courthouse. Behind the wheel sat Adrian Whitmore, a veteran federal judge whose reputation had been built over decades of patience, fairness, and unwavering respect for the rule of law. Dressed in a simple charcoal jacket over a light blue shirt, he looked like any other professional returning from a morning meeting. There were no visible signs of his position, no official vehicle, and no reason for passing drivers to recognize him. Just a few miles away, Officer Ethan Caldwell began one of the first solo patrols of his young career. Fresh out of the academy, Ethan carried equal amounts of determination and pressure. Every instructor had reminded him that confidence mattered, that hesitation could allow problems to grow, and that careful observation was the foundation of effective policing. He wanted to prove he deserved the badge he had worked so hard to earn. As traffic flowed through the outskirts of the city, Ethan noticed the silver sedan and decided to initiate a routine traffic stop after observing what he believed was a minor equipment violation. The emergency lights illuminated behind the vehicle, and Adrian responded immediately by signaling, slowing safely, and pulling onto the wide shoulder. He turned off the engine, lowered the driver's window, and rested both hands where they were clearly visible. Ethan approached with a professional greeting. "Good afternoon, sir. I am Officer Ethan Caldwell. May I please see your driver's license and registration?" Adrian nodded politely. "Certainly, officer." He handed over the requested documents without hesitation, maintaining calm eye contact and a courteous tone. Ethan reviewed the information carefully. Everything appeared ordinary, yet something about the driver's composed demeanor caught his attention. Most people showed at least a little nervousness during a traffic stop, but this man seemed completely at ease. Ethan asked where he was headed. Adrian answered simply that he was traveling to the federal courthouse for an afternoon commitment. The response sounded straightforward, but Ethan continued asking additional questions, believing he needed to verify every detail before concluding the stop. Passing motorists slowed slightly as they noticed the patrol vehicle on the shoulder. Across the road, employees leaving a nearby office building glanced toward the scene before continuing on their way. The conversation remained respectful, but an unmistakable tension began to settle over the quiet roadside. Adrian never argued, never interrupted, and never attempted to use his position to influence the encounter. Instead, he answered each question patiently, believing that professionalism was demonstrated most clearly during ordinary moments. Ethan, determined to handle every situation correctly, continued following the process as he understood it, unaware that the man standing beside the sedan had spent decades interpreting the very principles that guided his profession. Within the next few minutes, a routine stop would become an unforgettable lesson about judgment, humility, and the importance of verifying facts before reaching conclusions, and the silent camera mounted inside the patrol vehicle would preserve every second of what followed. Earlier that same morning, before the traffic stop unfolded, Adrian Whitmore had been preparing for another ordinary day built around extraordinary responsibility. For more than 30 years, he had studied laws, listened to countless stories, and carried the weight of decisions that affected people's lives. Yet outside the courtroom, he lived quietly. He preferred simple routines, familiar places, and conversations where people saw him as a neighbor before they ever saw his professional title. At sunrise, Adrian walked through a small neighborhood park near his home, greeting residents who were beginning their day. He stopped to speak with an older man who often sat near the walking path, discussing local events and community concerns. To Adrian, these moments mattered because justice was not only found inside a courtroom, it was also found in the way people treated each other when no official title was present. Later that morning, Adrian visited a local coffee shop before heading toward the courthouse. The owner knew him as a regular customer who always thanked the staff and remembered small details about their lives. While waiting for his order, he noticed a young employee struggling with a complicated delivery schedule. Adrian offered a few encouraging words and helped organize the paperwork on the counter. The employee smiled, surprised that someone so busy would take time to assist with such a small task. Adrian simply replied that every person deserved patience and respect, regardless of their position. Across the city, Ethan Caldwell prepared for his patrol shift with a different kind of responsibility on his shoulders. As a rookie officer, every decision felt important. He had spent years imagining the day he would finally wear the uniform and serve his community. He wanted to prove that he could be trusted with the authority that came with the badge. During the morning briefing, his supervisor reminded the new officers that professionalism was measured not only by confidence, but also by judgment. The best officers are not the ones who assume they already know everything, the supervisor explained. They are the ones who remain willing to learn. Ethan listened carefully, believing those words would guide him through his career. He reviewed his equipment, checked his patrol vehicle, and began his route with a strong sense of purpose. Throughout the morning, he handled routine calls, assisted drivers with directions, and exchanged friendly greetings with people throughout the area. Nothing suggested that the day would become memorable. Meanwhile, Adrian continued toward the courthouse, reviewing notes for an upcoming legal matter and enjoying the quiet drive. He had no reason to expect anything unusual. Ethan had no reason to expect anything unusual either. Two people from completely different parts of the same justice system were moving toward the same moment without knowing how closely their paths would soon connect. One carried decades of experience interpreting the law. The other carried the responsibility of learning how to apply it in the real world. Neither man understood that the next conversation they shared would challenge their perspectives and remind them that every encounter begins with a choice, to judge quickly or to seek the truth. Officer Ethan Caldwell looked once more at the driver's license before handing it back temporarily. Everything appeared valid, yet something continued to hold his attention. Adrian Whitmore remained standing beside the silver sedan with the same composed expression he had shown from the beginning of the encounter. He answered each question respectfully, never interrupting and never showing frustration. That calm confidence, however, caused Ethan to hesitate. In his limited experience, many routine traffic stops followed familiar patterns, but this conversation felt different in ways he could not explain. The afternoon traffic moved steadily past the shoulder as several drivers glanced toward the patrol vehicle before continuing on their way. A delivery truck slowed briefly before merging back into the flow of traffic. Across the highway, employees leaving a nearby office building noticed the flashing emergency lights, but quickly returned to their conversations. For everyone else, it looked like an ordinary stop that would end within minutes. Ethan asked another question. You mentioned you were heading to the federal courthouse. May I ask what brings you there today? Adrian answered with the same measured tone. I have professional responsibilities there this afternoon. Ethan nodded, still studying the documents. Do you work there regularly? Adrian smiled politely, without offering unnecessary detail. You could certainly say that. The answer was truthful, yet it left Ethan uncertain. He wanted to be thorough. His academy instructors had repeatedly emphasized that good officers verified information instead of relying on assumptions, but they had also warned that confidence should never become overconfidence. Standing beside the highway, Ethan found himself balancing those lessons in real time. He requested permission to conduct additional verification through dispatch. Adrian immediately agreed. Please, do. Verification protects everyone involved. The response caught Ethan's attention because it sounded less like the reaction of someone being questioned and more like advice from someone who understood professional procedure. One of the senior officers monitoring radio traffic happened to hear Ethan's request and reminded him to document each step carefully. Ethan acknowledged the instruction and contacted dispatch, reading the identifying information exactly as it appeared on the documents. While waiting for a response, neither man spoke for several moments. The silence was not uncomfortable. Instead, it reflected two professionals approaching the same situation from different perspectives. Adrian believed patience allowed the process to work as intended. Ethan believed careful verification would give him confidence in whatever decision came next. Inside the patrol vehicle, the dashboard camera continued recording every word, every pause, and every decision without emotion or opinion. It captured a conversation that remained respectful from beginning to end, preserving details that neither participant realized would later become important. A few seconds later, the dispatcher replied that additional verification would require confirmation from another office. Ethan acknowledged the update and waited. As the afternoon sun reflected across the windshield of the silver sedan, Both men understood that the next response would determine how the encounter moved forward, and neither of them could yet imagine how significant that ordinary moment would eventually become. The dispatcher returned to the radio with a calm voice that immediately changed the direction of the afternoon. "Officer Caldwell, additional verification is complete. The driver has valid federal credentials associated with the courthouse. A court security supervisor has confirmed that he is expected for official business this afternoon." Ethan acknowledged the transmission and remained silent for a moment as he processed the information. He looked across the hood of the patrol vehicle toward Adrian Whitmore, who continued standing patiently beside the silver sedan without showing frustration or impatience. Adrian had not attempted to influence the situation, had not mentioned his professional position, and had not asked for special treatment. He had simply trusted the verification process. Ethan stepped forward carrying the driver's license and registration with both hands. "Sir, thank you for your patience while we completed the verification." Adrian accepted the documents with a courteous nod. "Thank you for taking the time to confirm the information." The conversation remained respectful, yet Ethan could not ignore the realization that his uncertainty had extended an encounter that could have been resolved much sooner through careful verification. A county patrol supervisor who had monitored the radio traffic arrived a few minutes later to ensure everything had been handled correctly. After greeting both men professionally, the supervisor quietly reviewed the timeline with Ethan, emphasizing the importance of following established procedures from the very beginning of every stop. Adrian listened without interruption. When the supervisor apologized for the unexpected delay, Adrian responded with quiet sincerity. "Every professional has moments that become lessons. What matters is whether those lessons improve future decisions." His words carried no anger and no accusation. They reflected the same steady respect for the legal process that had guided his entire career. Inside the patrol vehicle, the dashboard camera continued recording every exchange. The small device captured a complete and accurate record of the stop, preserving not only the questions and answers, but also the respectful tone maintained throughout the encounter. Neither Ethan nor Adrian gave the camera much thought in that moment. To Ethan, it was simply another piece of standard equipment. To Adrian, it represented something more enduring. Objective records often protected everyone involved by replacing memory with facts. As traffic continued moving along the highway, nearby drivers no longer slowed to watch. The roadside gradually returned to normal, but Ethan sensed that the experience would remain with him long after the patrol shift ended. Before returning to his vehicle, he looked at Adrian and spoke honestly. "I appreciate the professionalism you showed today." Adrian smiled gently. "Professionalism is easiest when everyone remembers that the goal is the same. We are all trying to reach the truth." Ethan thanked him once more before walking back toward his patrol car. As Adrian pulled safely onto the highway and continued toward the federal courthouse, neither man realized that the dashboard recording from that ordinary afternoon would later become an important reference during a routine administrative review, prompting conversations throughout the department about communication, verification, and the responsibility every public servant carries whenever authority meets the public. By the following morning, the dashboard camera recording had already become part of a routine supervisory review. No one gathered around the screen expecting to witness an extraordinary event. The recording was selected simply because it involved a newer officer completing one of his earliest independent traffic stops. Inside the conference room at the department headquarters, several field training officers watched quietly as the encounter unfolded from beginning to end. The video revealed something that written reports alone could never fully capture. Every greeting, every question, every pause, and every decision appeared exactly as it had happened. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, and no argument. Instead, the recording showed how a series of ordinary choices gradually extended what should have remained a brief roadside conversation. When the playback reached the moment where dispatch confirmed the driver's verified federal credentials, the room became noticeably quieter. Captain Melissa Grant paused the recording and looked toward the younger officers seated around the table. "What lesson do you see here?" she asked. Several answers followed. One officer mentioned communication. Another pointed to the importance of clear documentation. Ethan listened carefully before speaking. I focused so much on proving that I could handle the situation correctly that I forgot the purpose of the process itself. Verification should guide decisions from the beginning, not only after uncertainty grows. Captain Grant nodded. Confidence is valuable. Humility makes confidence effective. Later that afternoon, Adrian Whitmore continued his normal judicial responsibilities without discussing the traffic stop publicly. He believed that isolated mistakes should become opportunities for improvement whenever possible. During a conversation with another federal judge following the day's hearings, Adrian reflected on the importance of public trust. People remember how authority makes them feel, he said thoughtfully. When respect remains present, even difficult situations can become opportunities to strengthen confidence in the institutions that serve them. Meanwhile, Ethan requested permission to review the dashboard recording again on his own. Sitting alone in a quiet training room, he watched every minute without interruption. This time he paid attention not only to his own actions, but also to Adrian's steady demeanor. The driver never attempted to influence the outcome through status, never displayed impatience, and never challenged the officer's professionalism. Instead, he consistently demonstrated patience, cooperation, and confidence in the process. Ethan realized that true professionalism had been standing in front of him throughout the encounter, quietly setting an example without ever announcing it. Before leaving the department that evening, Ethan wrote several personal notes inside the notebook he carried throughout field training. He listed 3 reminders for every future encounter. Verify facts before forming conclusions. Listen as carefully as you speak. Remember that every person deserves the same dignity regardless of appearance, occupation, or circumstance. He closed the notebook believing the experience had already changed him, unaware that the dashboard recording would soon reach officials outside the department, beginning conversations that extended far beyond a single traffic stop and raising important questions about policy, training, accountability, and the responsibility carried by every public servant entrusted with authority. Several days after the internal review concluded, the dashboard recording reached the department's Professional Standards Division as part of a broader evaluation of field training procedures. What had begun as an ordinary traffic stop was now being examined for the decisions that shaped it rather than the outcome itself. The reviewers were not searching for dramatic moments. They were studying how communication, verification, and judgment influenced public confidence. Every minute of the recording reinforced the same conclusion. The encounter remained calm, respectful, and free from hostility, yet it also demonstrated how uncertainty can quietly extend a routine stop when assumptions are allowed to outpace confirmed facts. Chief Laura Bennett requested a meeting with supervisors responsible for academy instruction and field training. Around the conference table, experienced officers discussed practical improvements instead of assigning personal blame. One instructor suggested additional scenario-based exercises focused on communication. Another recommended emphasizing that verification should occur as early as possible whenever uncertainty exists. The discussion gradually shifted away from a single officer and towards strengthening the department as a whole. Ethan Caldwell attended the meeting at the chief's invitation. Rather than defending every decision he had made, he listened carefully as veteran officers explained how experience often teaches lessons that no classroom can fully provide. When asked to share his perspective, Ethan spoke honestly. He admitted that his desire to perform well had caused him to focus more on proving himself than on slowing down to evaluate every available fact. The room remained silent for a moment before Chief Bennett thanked him for his candor. She reminded everyone that genuine professionalism begins when public servants are willing to learn from difficult experiences instead of denying them. Across town, Adrian Whitmore continued hearing cases with the same thoughtful approach that had earned respect throughout the federal judiciary. He never discussed the traffic stop from the bench because he believed every legal matter deserved complete impartiality. However, during a judicial education seminar later that week, he spoke about a broader principle without referring to specific events. He explained that institutions become stronger when they examine their own processes with honesty, transparency, and humility. Several judges and legal professionals quietly agreed that public confidence depends not on perfection, but on a consistent willingness to improve. Meanwhile, news of the department's policy review spread through local government offices and community organizations. Civic leaders welcomed the decision to strengthen training before similar misunderstandings could occur elsewhere. Conversations centered on accountability, communication, and mutual respect rather than personal criticism. Ethan watched those developments with a different perspective than he would have possessed only days earlier. He realized that a badge represented far more than authority. It represented a daily promise to make careful decisions that deserved the public's trust. As another patrol shift began under the warm evening sky, he fastened his badge with renewed purpose, knowing that the most valuable lesson of his young career had not been taught by a manual or an academy instructor, but by one quiet roadside conversation that reminded him the search for truth always begins with the discipline to verify before reaching conclusions. The weeks that followed brought unexpected changes throughout the department, not because of one dramatic event, but because many small conversations began taking place behind closed doors and within training rooms. Officers who had spent years on patrol found themselves discussing situations they had previously handled without much reflection. They examined how quickly decisions could be made during ordinary encounters and how important it was to create space for patience, communication, and understanding. For Ethan Caldwell, the experience remained a defining moment in his early career. He continued his regular patrol duties, but his approach had changed. He listened longer before responding. He asked clearer questions. He focused less on appearing confident and more on building trust through every interaction. During a training session with new recruits, Ethan was invited to share what he had learned. Standing in front of officers who reminded him of himself only months earlier, he explained that wearing a badge came with responsibilities that extended beyond enforcing rules. People may remember the decision you make in a few minutes, he said, but they will remember how you treated them for much longer. The room remained quiet as the recruits considered his words. Ethan did not present himself as someone who had all the answers. Instead, he spoke as someone who had learned an important lesson through experience. Meanwhile, Adrian Whitmore continued his work at the federal courthouse. His schedule remained filled with hearings, legal research, and conversations about justice. Despite the attention surrounding the traffic stop review, he avoided turning the situation into a personal victory. He believed that lasting improvement came from stronger systems and better preparation rather than public criticism. During a community legal education event, Adrian was asked about the role of trust in institutions. He paused before answering. Trust is built when people know that the process matters, and when those responsible for that process are willing to improve. His response reflected the same calm perspective he had shown during the roadside encounter. Months later, the department introduced updated communication exercises for officers, using realistic scenarios designed to improve decision-making under pressure. The training focused on listening, documentation, and recognizing when additional verification could prevent unnecessary complications. Supervisors noticed that younger officers became more comfortable admitting uncertainty and seeking guidance when needed. Ethan watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. He understood that progress rarely arrived through one announcement or one meeting. It developed through consistent effort from people willing to examine their choices. On another afternoon, Adrian and Ethan happened to cross paths at a public service event hosted by local organizations. Their conversation was brief, but both recognized how much had changed since the day they first met on the roadside. There was no need for dramatic words. They simply exchanged respectful greetings and acknowledged the importance of moving forward. The moment served as a reminder that every encounter has the potential to teach something valuable. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from situations no one expects, and sometimes the strongest improvements begin with the simple decision to listen, learn, and do better the next time. As time passed, the impact of the roadside encounter continued to reach far beyond the people who were present that afternoon. What first appeared to be a simple review of one traffic stop became a broader conversation about responsibility, preparation, and the importance of thoughtful decision-making in public service. Across the department, supervisors began noticing a shift in how officers approached their daily responsibilities. The focus was no longer only on completing procedures correctly, but also on understanding how those procedures affected the people involved. Ethan Caldwell experienced that change personally. Months earlier, he had believed that being a good officer meant having every answer immediately. Now he understood that true professionalism also required the humility to ask questions, seek clarification, and recognize when patience could prevent unnecessary confusion. During another training session, Ethan sat among experienced officers and listened as instructors discussed real-world situations where communication shaped outcomes. He noticed that the strongest officers were not always the ones who spoke the most confidently. They were often the ones who listened carefully, remained calm, and understood that every interaction represented the values of the institution they served. Meanwhile, Adrian Whitmore continued his work at the federal courthouse, maintaining the same steady approach that had defined his career. He reviewed cases, met with legal professionals, and continued helping younger attorneys understand the importance of fairness and careful reasoning. When colleagues asked him about the attention surrounding the previous incident, Adrian always redirected the conversation toward improvement. He believed that meaningful change came when people examined systems honestly and looked for ways to make them stronger. One evening, Adrian attended a public forum focused on trust between communities and public institutions. During the discussion, he shared a simple idea that stayed with many people afterward. The strength of any system depends on the willingness of people inside it to learn and improve. Those words reflected the lesson he had carried throughout his own career. Not perfection, but progress. Not avoiding mistakes, but responding to them with responsibility. Ethan eventually became one of the officers who helped guide newer recruits. When young officers asked him what lesson mattered most during their first year, he often returned to the same message. Slow down when the moment matters. Facts become clearer when you give yourself time to see the full picture. His advice came not from a textbook, but from experience. It came from a moment that challenged his perspective and changed how he viewed his role. The department continued updating training programs, improving communication methods, and creating more opportunities for officers to learn from real situations. The goal was not to focus on one person or one event, but to build a stronger culture of professionalism. Looking back, both Adrian and Ethan understood that the most important moments in life are not always the ones people plan for. Sometimes they arrive unexpectedly, during ordinary days, through conversations that seem small at first. Yet those moments can reveal character, inspire growth, and remind people that every decision carries meaning. The road where they first met eventually returned to being just another stretch of highway. But the lesson created there continued traveling much farther, carried forward by everyone who chose to listen, learn, and move forward with greater understanding. Nearly 1 year after the quiet afternoon that unexpectedly changed 2 careers, the same stretch of highway looked no different from thousands of other roads across the country. Cars continued traveling toward the city, local residents followed familiar routines, and patrol vehicles completed ordinary shifts without attracting attention. Nothing about the location suggested that one routine traffic stop had inspired lasting improvements throughout an entire department. Yet for those who had experienced that day firsthand, the memory remained a reminder that meaningful change often begins with ordinary moments. Ethan Caldwell had completed his first year as a patrol officer with a new understanding of what the badge truly represented. Experience had replaced uncertainty with thoughtful confidence, and every encounter reflected lessons that no academy classroom alone could provide. He no longer measured success by how quickly a situation ended. Instead, he judged himself by whether every person left believing they had been treated with dignity, patience, and fairness. During annual department training, Ethan was invited to address the newest class of recruits. Looking across the room, he saw the same determination he once carried into his own first assignment. He shared no dramatic stories and sought no sympathy. Instead, he spoke about responsibility. The public will remember your character long after they forget the reason for the stop, he said calmly. Authority gives you responsibility. Integrity earns you trust. The recruits listened carefully, understanding that the most valuable lesson came from honesty rather than perfection. Across the city, Adrian Whitmore continued serving on the federal bench with the same quiet discipline that had defined his career. Every case reminded him that justice depended upon careful listening, objective facts, and respect for every individual who entered the courtroom. Although the roadside encounter had become a catalyst for policy improvements and professional discussion, Adrian never viewed it as a personal victory. He believed the true success belonged to everyone willing to learn from it. One afternoon, Adrian attended a joint community program where judges, law enforcement officers, students, and civic leaders discussed public confidence in legal institutions. Ethan happened to attend as part of the department's outreach team. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes, yet it reflected how far both men had come. They shook hands warmly, exchanged sincere smiles, and spoke about the importance of continuous learning. Neither mentioned the traffic stop directly because neither needed to. The lesson had already accomplished its purpose. As the event concluded, families gathered outside beneath American flags moving gently in the evening breeze while children laughed across the nearby park. Officers answered questions from local residents. Judges greeted community leaders, and volunteers packed away chairs as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. It was an ordinary evening filled with ordinary people, yet it perfectly represented the future both men hoped to encourage. Trust was not built by titles alone. It was strengthened one respectful conversation at a time. As Adrian watched the final guests leave and Ethan prepared to begin another patrol shift, both understood the same enduring truth. Laws establish standards. Procedures create consistency. But character determines how those standards are carried into the lives of real people. In the end, the strongest institutions are not those that never face difficult moments. They are the ones that respond with humility, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to becoming better tomorrow than they were yesterday.